Just 1 week before the wedding of my son, I overheard a conversation that left me absolutely devastated. My family was putting together preparations for the day, and I was incorporated into those plans to a greater extent than I had anticipated beforehand. They had come to the conclusion that my responsibility would be to ensure that there were no problems with the 15 youngsters throughout the duration of the full welcome. This was not a casual suggestion that came to mind in the moment. Instead, it was a complete strategy that had been well considered and organized. My son, Marcus, and his fiancée, Tiffany, made the decision that I would be spending the entire wedding chasing children around instead of being able to savor the historic event with my family, all without consulting me on the matter. Despite my reluctance, I discovered that I was secretly listening in on their discussion. Because I was on the patio, I was able to hear what they were saying. Tiffany began discussing the plans she had already put in place for me to look after the children. Her tone was gruff and scratchy, which was in stark contrast to her typical soft and courteous manner of speaking. I remained perfectly motionless in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I was absolutely engrossed in the sounds that I was picking up. It is difficult to see why they would think that I would be more receptive to a viewpoint like that at the wedding of my own son rather than anyone else. I have devoted a significant amount of both my time and energy to making sure that this day is perfect for everyone who is participating. I had been working on putting together the spread for the wedding reception for several months. I promised them that I would take care of everything, which led to them saving thousands of dollars in expenses related to catering. I was looking for a way to communicate to my son how much he means to me and how pleased I am of him for finding love again. However, it would appear that my dedication and the sacrifices that I made did not have as significant of an impact as I had first believed they had. I had been working non-stop on this wedding, preparing a wonderful buffet, planning the decor, and making sure that every single detail was taken care of. It turned out that being left with only the role of a free babysitter was how things ended up. That is the gratitude that I received. As soon as I thought of something new, I was overwhelmed by a feeling of wonder so intense that I felt it was necessary to take a step back. Her tone changed as a result of the words that Tiffany spoke, to which I paid great attention. She started to go into detail about how I would not even notice the wait, and she laughed as if being surrounded by 15 screaming children would be a delightful diversion. The weight that I felt on top of my chest gave me the clear sensation that it was something substantial. Did they have this particular perception of me? Because I had been there for them in the past, they thought that I would continue to be available to them without any reluctance and would execute any tasks that they did not want to carry out themselves. Because I had been there for them in the past, they believed that I would continue to be there for them without a moment's hesitation and undertake any jobs for them that they did not want to do. At that particular point in time, I started to become incredibly enraged because I could feel a feeling of wrath welling up within me. It seemed as though there was never enough of any of those things, even though I had relinquished my time, my money, my energy, all of the things that I had previously done for my family. They did not treat me with the kind of respect that I was entitled to get from them. They did not even bother to inquire as to whether or not I would be prepared to provide assistance to them. They simply assumed that I would comply with whatever requests that they had without offering any concerns. I had lost my former enthusiasm for listening, even if I was still hidden behind the curtain and so not in their line of sight. I was overcome with a strange mixture of feelings that included disappointment, a strong sense of embarrassment, and the belief that I had been betrayed. Placing my family in the most crucial position is something that I have done without fail for 72 years. Throughout the course of his life, I raised Marcus and made sure he knew that I loved him. At the very moment at which he was offered with the opportunity to demonstrate to me that he respected me, I was entirely forgotten about. It seemed that Tiffany, who had always behaved in such a cordial and agreeable manner in the past, had suddenly developed the perception that I was a nuisance. Having a mother-in-law is something that she did not want to do. The thought of having a servant who is completely devoted to her alone occupied her thoughts for a long time. After several days of harboring feelings of intense rage, I finally reached my breaking point. It was not simply a matter of fury, however. It was connected to a terrible and profound realization. My personal goal has always been to put other people's needs before my own. I make it a point to make sure that they are doing well and are happy before I do. I had truly come to a point in my life where there was a real risk that I may lose the respect of the one person who should have cared more about me than anyone else in the world. I finally started to comprehend what I was hearing after I had been listening for a longer period of time. Not only was I treated in a manner that demonstrated a lack of respect, but I was also taken advantage of. They had gone to great lengths to make their day unique, yet it appeared as though they were treating them as though they were worth less than nothing. All my life, I have looked upon Tiffany as the daughter I never had but always wished for. I had given her a chunk of my life, my recipes, and my time. She found it effortless to manipulate me in order to make her life more convenient, and she did not think twice about laughing at me behind my back. She did not even take the time to ask me if I would want to assist her with the children or to wait for my response to her request. She reached that judgment without any supporting evidence. It was at that moment that I became cognizant of something that was far more painful. Marcus had been participating in it as well. The anticipation that he had for the upcoming nuptials, along with the emotions of affection that he experienced, were so overwhelming that they prevented him from being able to perceive what was actually going on around him. The notion that I was not being handled with fairness did not even enter his head. I was standing there, and I was feeling the weight of my disappointment. That is when I came to the understanding that I could not leave this situation the way it was. That day, I left the window with a sense of determination that I had not felt for a long time. Throughout the course of my life, I have made sacrifices for other people, provided them with the things that they needed, and never once asked for anything in return. Regardless, there would be a complete lack of tolerance for it going forward. It was imperative that I assert myself. I would never treat my son or his fiancée, or anybody else for that matter, in such a way that is so utterly disrespectful. I was not going to remain their slave any longer, nor was I going to continue to let them take advantage of me. I devoted an inordinate amount of time to concentrating on the needs of other people. I decided that it was high time for me to begin putting my own needs above those of other people. The most important day of my life, my son's wedding, would take place without me. I did not intend to be the person that was always there for them to provide assistance whenever they needed it. I was not going to be that person who they could always count on without paying any consideration to my sentiments. I would no longer be known as the inconspicuous auxiliary worker who operates behind the scenes. The days on which it had been put to use had come to an end. I was aware of the fact that I had to do something about the situation because I needed to get my dignity back. When my heart was pounding in my chest and my mind was swirling around with emotions, I arrived to the conclusion that at that particular moment in time, I could no longer afford to let things continue to remain as they were. I reached the realization that I had to start defending myself. This was something that I had never done at any time in my life up to that moment. I eventually came to the conclusion that it was not merely a matter of the wedding after giving it a great deal of consideration. It was about everything. It was not only the fact that Marcus and Tiffany treated me as though I were a free resource, but it was also the truth that it was the conclusion of a lifetime of being expected to contribute without ever receiving anything in return. For a long period of time, I had been preoccupied with meeting the demands of other people while putting my own issues on the back burner. As a result, I had lost what it was that made me so distinctive as an individual. I had transformed into a woman who was defined solely by the roles that I played for other people. Grandmother, wife, and mother, but never truly as Charlotte. My own requirements and desires had become imperceptible, not just to the people who were in my immediate vicinity but also to myself. I had finally reached the point when I needed to take control of my own life and completely cease living my life according to the expectations of other people. I continued to carry on as though nothing abnormal had taken place in the days that followed. I remained in charge of taking care of all of the preparations at the last minute, and I continued to handle all of the phone calls that Marcus received regarding the wedding. I also made sure that everything was ready as I had promised it would be. I, on the other hand, was developing some plans on the sly. I was making plans. I was definitely coming up with schemes. I had the strong impression that I had to take a tough stance and that I couldn't simply back out of this position or get married without putting up a struggle. It wasn't just about the buffet or the kids. It was about my self-respect and making sure that Marcus, Tiffany, and everyone else in my life realized that I was not going to be treated like a doormat again. In the face of their exploitation of my time and energy, I was not going to. stand back and do nothing. It was my responsibility to make a declaration that would unquestionably reach the ears of those who were listening. I was not going to allow them to walk all over me and to believe that they could treat me this way and escape suffering the consequences of their actions. The most challenging aspect was that I had been utterly oblivious to the fact that they had been deceiving me, and I had thought that love alone would be sufficient to maintain my connection with my son and his fiancée. It was foolish of me to believe that love consisted of giving to others without expecting anything in return. The moment that I brought up my proposition to Loretta, she was taken aback and impressed by what I had to say. I had been acquainted with Loretta for a long time, and this familiarity had continued for many years. She had been a continuous source of support for me in the past, and she had always stood by my side through both the good times and the bad. She immediately recognized the reason for my behavior the moment that I recounted all of the events that had taken place in my life and provided her with a description of the way in which I had been treated. "You have dedicated your entire life to looking out for other people, Charlotte. This time you are going to have to look out for yourself," were the words that had slipped Loretta's lips. When she said all of that, it was as if I had been granted some sort of insight. It did indeed occur in the manner in which it was described. For the duration of all these years, I have exerted all effort within my ability to support my family, my child, Tiffany, and the people that hold significant meaning to me. They had expected that I would never let them down and that I would be there at all times, and they had taken my attendance for granted as a result of this. I needed to defend myself and fight for my own rights, as Loretta had previously mentioned. I was not acting out of self-interest alone. I was doing it out of solidarity with all of the women who, in the past, had been forgotten and who had spent their lives serving other people without ever receiving the acknowledgement that they were owed. It was time to make a modification to that. As a consequence of this, I was in the middle of implementing my strategy. I was aware that it would be a challenge, and I was also aware that I would have to deal with the repercussions of what I did. Following a thorough deliberation of the situation, I have come to the conclusion that the repercussions of maintaining my silence were far more serious than what I had originally anticipated. I had planned to provide a lesson to my son, Marcus, and his fiancée, Tiffany. They were going to be the ones who received it. I would deal with it in such a manner that there would be absolutely no question as to whether or not the matter had been settled. After some time had passed, they would inevitably arrive at the conclusion that I was not their slave. When I was not a person who could be exploited and thrown aside at any moment that was to their advantage, I was aware that it was the correct course of action to take, despite the fact that making the decision was an exceptionally difficult challenge. Not only was I intending on canceling the buffet and the decorations, I was also planning on canceling all of the preparations. I would be obliged to retract every single promise that I had made to them, as well as every single technique that I had come up with in an effort to make a contribution to their marriage ceremony. After the way in which they had spoken about me, I was not going to allow them to continue to assume that they could treat me poorly in any way, shape, or form. If they were to attempt to make me feel as though I do not exist, they would be able to observe the full extent to which I would be able to make myself completely invisible. All of the work that I had started was already finished before the day of the wedding had arrived. I rescinded the plans I had been working on for several months with the caterers, the floral arrangers, and the other vendors. I did not worry myself with how they would react when they discovered that the truth was actually much different from what they had previously believed. My goal in doing this was to maintain both my self-respect and my dignity. For the first time in my life, I was going to say no without feeling any remorse about it. I was not going to let my son or any other people influence me into doing something that I did not want to do. As I was going through the process of packing my luggage early that morning in anticipation of my weekend getaway, I was overcome with a feeling of emancipation. It wasn't merely an issue relating to the wedding. It was a matter relating to my entire existence. For a long period of time, I have made the happiness of other people my top priority, even over my own happiness. The magnitude of this has resulted in my forgetting what it feels like to make my own well-being my first concern. I became cognizant of the fact that I had finally found my own voice at the same moment when I was about to enter this new phase of my life. It wasn't only a matter of being against the marriage. It was also a matter of being against a lifetime of being taken for granted. In this situation, making a decision was a very complicated task. I cherished Marcus with all of my heart and soul. Therefore, it was a difficult decision to choose not to go to his wedding. Regardless, I eventually came to the conclusion that, in the long run, this was the only way that he would be able to properly comprehend the magnitude of the sorrow that my actions had brought about in him. There is no doubt about the fact that I was no longer simply his mother. I was a person who can be counted on to be of no assistance to him in any circumstance. I was a lady who lived a life that was uniquely my own. I had my own ambitions and objectives. For the first time in a long time, I was on the point of making a decision that would put my own interests first. Treating me like property was the last thing I would ever allow them to do. I was not going to let them use me whatever they saw fit and then abandon me as soon as it was convenient for them to do so. As I left my house that morning with Loretta by my side, I felt a sense of freedom that I had not had in many years. I have now reached a point where I am no longer weighed down by the load of the expectations that other people have put upon me, and I am now able to live my life in accordance with my own personal beliefs and values. I was well aware, on the other hand, of the fact that the conflict was still happening. The marriage ceremony was the first incident in a lengthy succession of events that took place. It was my responsibility to follow through with what I decided to do, and it was my responsibility to deal with the repercussions that arose as a result of my decision. The task that was assigned to me was to investigate whether or not the lesson that I was attempting to impart to Marcus and Tiffany would be comprehensible to them. Would they finally come to respect me, or would they persist in underestimating the things that I do for them? Waiting until the material is made accessible would be the only way to ascertain the facts. The moment that I took my seat in the vehicle and cast my gaze out the window, I became cognizant of the fact that I had made the correct choice, and I was certain of this with utter and complete certainty. To finally do something that I had never done before, which was to stand up for myself, was something I was finally accomplishing. I was prepared for whatever that might have taken place, regardless of the circumstances. I was hit with a wide range of feelings while sitting in the car with Loretta. The tears that were on the verge of spilling over clouded the scene outside, giving the impression that there was a haze. After years of constantly being the one to back down, I eventually came to the understanding that I needed to take charge of my own life and start standing up for myself. Pride and relief were both emotions that, when combined, created a strange cocktail of sentiments. Regardless, she continued to be saddled with a sense of shame that never seemed to let up. Even though everything had happened, I continued to have great feelings of affection for Marcus because he was the only child that I had. I found that I had an unsuppressible want to question myself about whether or not the decision that I had made was the correct one. Am I being very stringent with you? Is it something that may happen? Does my reaction seem to be more intense than the situation called for? I recalled the conversation that they had, however, and the manner in which Tiffany and Marcus had spoken about me as if I were merely another piece of furniture, valuable only when they need something from me. I had not been overly strict in that particular instance. This incident was not just related to the wedding or the buffet. My dignity was also engaged in it. It was important to give Marcus a lesson that he would remember for the rest of his life, as well as a lesson that would benefit the two of them. I had a lot of time to kill on the long drive to the spa, and I used the opportunity to ponder about many topics. After the passing of my partner in life, I reflected on the many years that I had dedicated to being the sole guardian of Marcus. It was not simple at all. There were times when I was unsure of how I would earn enough money to make ends meet, and there were even times when I had to forego my own meals in order to make sure that my son had something to eat. I, on the other hand, have never expressed any feelings of displeasure. Took action based on the assumption that I was in love. For the sake of his future prospects and his well-being, I gave up everything. As of the current moment, it seems as though this attachment has been seen as a foregone conclusion. In order to make sure that Marcus had all he required, I had to put my own life on wait many times and make numerous sacrifices over the course of many years. It was as though all of that had been completely left behind in a single moment. It was challenging, but it also brought to the realization that I had to quit living my life for other people if I wanted to. I came to the conclusion that I would no longer continue to make sacrifices for those persons who had failed to recognize the things that I had accomplished. If I wanted to maintain my own sense of well-being, I had to learn how to say no to certain things. When we were driving, Loretta did not utter a single word, which suggests that she was aware of the turbulent thoughts that were flying around inside my head at that time. She provided me with a constant source of solace because she simply permitted me to be myself. Loretta was the one who stood by me at all of the trying periods in my life when I felt like there was not a single other person in the entire world who cared about me. She always displayed a sense of acceptance towards me, even in the moments when I was at my worst. In a great number of various respects, Loretta had adopted many of the qualities that one would expect of a sister to me. She was the type of friend who would always be there to lend a listening ear whenever I wanted to talk, who would offer me words of encouragement, and who would help me see things more clearly when my emotions made it difficult for me to think rationally. When we were drawing near to the spa, Loretta looked in my direction and then offered me a smile. "Charlotte, you made the correct choice. It is not feasible to continue giving and not receive anything in return. You are worthy of happiness, and you are worthy of being treated with respect." I was comforted by the gentle words that she offered, which were like a soothing salve for my spirit. I continued to waver to a certain degree, even though I was well aware that the things that she was saying were true. What will happen once I come back? If I were in Marcus' place, what would you say? Is it likely that he would even have the ability to comprehend? The realization that there was no more time for ambiguity washed over me as soon as I laid eyes on the spa. I was completely unprepared for anything that might occur. I had reached a decision, and I felt that the timing was right for me to stick to it. I was on the verge of taking advantage of this chance that had offered itself to me. My goal was to recover the aspects of myself that I had abandoned as a consequence of taking on the roles of grandmother and mother. I was able to seize the day and do something remarkable. This is something that I am convinced I am entitled to. Upon my arrival at the spa, I discovered that it was exactly what I had anticipated it would be like. Therefore, I was not at all let down by the experience. The second that we stepped through the entranceway, the atmosphere became completely filled with the fragrance of lavender and eucalyptus, which immediately transported my thoughts into a relaxed condition. As soon as we arrived, the receptionist welcomed us with a smile on their face and gave each of us a mimosa, which is a type of drink that is typically presented to new guests and to celebrate the beginning of a day of leisure. I experienced a sense of relief when Loretta and I were taken to our room, which was like a burden being lifted off of my shoulders. There were other factors as well that contributed to the strain he was feeling as a result of the preparations for the wedding, as well as the fatigue that he had been experiencing over the past few days. This was a matter that was far more profound than any other matter. I had been unaware of the extent to which I had been holding on to this until this precise moment. For a significant amount of my life, I was a woman whose identity was influenced by the expectations that other people had for me. I have been a grandmother, a spouse, and a mother. I was a woman who never hesitated to give of herself to other people without seeking anything in return. However, I was in this position today, giving myself the highest priority for the very first time. Being here for myself instilled in me a sense of self-worth that I had not had in quite some time. It was something that I had been longing for. The massage was beyond compare and exceptionally unlike anything else out there. I became lost in my thoughts as the massage therapist worked her magic, releasing all of the tension that had accumulated in my shoulders and back. I found myself wondering how much time had elapsed since I had done anything that was solely for my own benefit. Before attending to the demands of other people, I have always made sure that I took care of my own desires. It was for this reason that Tiffany required me. Marcus needed assistance with this particular duty. My young dependents had a diverse range of requests and requirements that necessitated my assistance. I was not required to be present today, which is a state of affairs that has not occurred for quite a lengthy period of time. I was simply a woman by the name of Charlotte who was taking a sabbatical that she had earned and re-establishing her sense of inner calm. I felt my body getting lighter and lighter as the therapist pushed her fingers into my muscles, kneading away all of the stress and pain that I had acquired throughout the years. At long last, I found myself entirely free from any worries over the actions I was required to conduct next. It did not cross my mind that the ones who were angry with me could have been Marcus, Tiffany, or the decorations or the buffet. I was just going about my daily routine and I felt like I was on top of the world. We were shown to a private room after the massage, and it had a view of the lake that was really gorgeous. The tranquil environment and the reflections of the water, which were not moving, created the sensation that time was flowing at a slower pace. We talked about a variety of various topics while taking modest sips of wine, as well as a few that did not have much importance. I was taking my time, which was a change of pace for me. I hadn't been doing that in quite a long time. I was saddled with the following piece of work or politeness that I had to carry out, and it was an obligation that I had absolutely not expected to have to take on. I was present at that moment, and I was savoring and delighting in the tranquility that it brought. Because I was not aware of the events that were taking place at the wedding, I did not give a single damn at that specific moment in time. I had come to a conclusion, and the moment had arrived for me to collect the benefits that were associated with the choice that I had made. As the evening continued, I found myself contemplating the ways in which this weekend was unlike any other weekend that I had ever experienced. I had dedicated days to preparing for family celebrations on a variety of different occasions. This preparation included hours of cooking and making certain that everyone was well taken care of. Every one of these events has become impossible to tell apart from any of the others. After what seemed like an eternity of catering to the requirements of other people, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to concentrate on my own requirements. I had forgotten how it felt to live my life for myself and to do something just because it brought me enjoyment, rather than because it was something that another person wanted me to do. The next morning, when I awoke to the gentle rays of sunlight that filtered through the curtains, I was overcome with a sense of rejuvenation that I hadn't experienced in years. The feeling of liberation was felt with such intensity that it was almost overwhelming. There was more to the sense of well-being that I had been experiencing after my visit to the spa than simply the physical relaxation that it had provided, despite the fact that the treatment had achieved great benefits. I gained mental clarity and an awareness that made this feasible due to my ability to place my own needs above those of other people, which was something I was permitted to do. It was not necessary for me to be the one who responded with yes at all times. I did not have to be the person who was in command of everything all of the time. If refusing to do anything was something that someone desired to do, then saying no was considered appropriate. For a period of time that is unreasonably long, I have held the conviction that placing the needs of other people before my own is the only way that I can demonstrate my affection for them. That being said, I have now come to the conclusion that falling in love does not necessarily need you to give up your sense of self. As soon as I turned my cell phone back on, I began receiving phone calls again. It was Marcus who sent messages that were brimming with desperation and regret. Tiffany left a number of missed calls in a row. Each one of these calls seemed more urgent than the one before it. I took a brief look at them, but I did not receive the same feeling that I needed to respond immediately. This matter was no longer a source of worry for me. They had chosen to bring this upon themselves, and the repercussions of their choices were now unavoidable. There was nothing that I had planned to return quickly to repair for their benefit. The idea of being the person who would assume the burden of responsibility for cleaning up the disaster that they had caused did not appeal to me in the slightest. I had finished every one of the assignments that had been assigned to me. I surrendered my possessions, which signified the end of that particular circumstance. They now possessed the chance to learn about the significance of showing respect for me. I was completely aware of the fact that the decision that I had taken was the correct one. I was aware that this was the only manner in which Marcus could possibly have complete comprehension of the consequences that his actions would bring about. Additionally, I was well aware of the fact that this moment marked the beginning of a new phase in my life. I had taken the initiative to take charge of my own life, and a new chapter had begun. As I was sitting there pondering on the events that had taken place over the past couple of days, I found myself experiencing an assortment of emotions that included both contentment and worry. I was forced to make the decision to leave Marcus and Tiffany's wedding at that moment in my life. Prior to that time, I had never experienced anything that was more challenging for me than being my own advocate. I made the decision to put my own needs before those of my family for the first time in my life, following a lifetime of making sacrifices for the benefit of my family. It had not been a simple matter at all, and it had brought with it a significant burden of emotions. That is the point in time, though, when I became aware of the fact that for a long period of time, I had been holding back my own personal development. The concept of love that I have held for a long time is the idea that it involves giving to others without expecting anything in return. Nevertheless, I now acknowledge that love, especially love of oneself, also involves the establishment of boundaries. It was necessary to preserve my dignity, my peace of mind, and my overall sense of well-being. I was no longer affected by the typical feeling of humiliation because my phone was continually vibrating as a result of receiving texts from Marcus and Tiffany. Even though it was slightly odd, being liberated felt good. In the past, I would have experienced a great urge to respond fast, to resolve the matter at hand, and to provide an explanation for my behavior. This particular situation is not one of those exceptional moments. This time around, I did not have any plans to turn around and return to help them. The repercussions of the conclusions that they had reached were something that they had to figure out how to cope with once they had reached them. I had made sure to communicate in the simplest way imaginable that I was not their slave, and that I was not required to do anything they wanted me to do at any moment of their choosing. I was not going to stand by and let anybody treat me as though I was an indentured servant. I had absolutely no desire to allow them to continue harboring the belief that I would keep giving and giving without receiving any form of acknowledgement or respect in return. During this entire catastrophe, I have found solace in the presence of Loretta. She was able to perceive the transformation that had taken place within me as a consequence of this encounter. The truth that I had the capability to do considerably more than I had previously believed possible was something that she was always cognizant of. With the passage of time, I had forgotten the woman I used to be. The woman who was courageous, powerful, and independent, who raised her child on her own after her husband's death, and who constructed a life based on love and dedication. I went through a phase of my life in which I became a mother and grandmother. During this time I put other people's needs before my own, and in the process I forgot how to put myself first. All the same, about this moment in time that was beginning to undergo alteration. I was putting up a fight to get my life, my time, and my dignity back. I was making progress in my capacity to put limitations on myself without being apprehensive about the risk of rejection, as well as in my ability to say no without experiencing any feelings of guilt. While I was gazing out at the placid waters of the lake, I contemplated the many years that I had spent sacrificing my own personal goals in order to make other people happy. I was always the individual who took care of all the planning for occasions such as family reunions, holiday dinners, and birthday celebrations. Over the course of my life, I have always been the sort of person that is prepared to lend a helping hand, provide comfort, and offer support to other people. Regardless of how that may be, what exactly had I left in my past? It wasn't just about the wedding or the buffet. It was about a lifetime of self-sacrifice, of prioritizing the desires of other people above my own at all times. This included the notion that I had been used, the feeling that I was invisible, and the sense of emptiness. I had forgotten who I was in my efforts to accomplish that particular goal. However, that is all it is. I had set aside a significant portion of myself for my family, and now the time had come for me to reclaim it. Writing a book has always been one of my goals in life. I had made a commitment to myself to one day sit down and write down all of the recipes that had belonged to my grandmother, as well as all of the stories that had been handed down over the generations about my family's history and the traditions that had been preserved over time, but life always got in the way. There was always something that took precedence over every other obligation: additional cleaning that needed to be completed, more food that needed to be prepared, and other favors that had to be performed. Nevertheless, during the time that I was sitting there in the seclusion and peacefulness of the spa, I came to the realization that I would never genuinely begin to live my life for myself if I did not do it at that very moment. If I did not take time out for my personal aspirations, then no one else would be able to do so. I reached a conclusion, and I made a decision based on what I concluded. I was planning on beginning to write as soon as I arrived at home. I was not going to sit back and wait for things to work out or for the ideal opportunity to present itself. I was attempting to propel the issue forward. I was about to start working on writing my book. Whether it was perfect or whether I was prepared to deal with it did not matter. The most important thing was that I was taking the initial step towards accomplishing something that was mine and mine alone. It was something that I owned and no other person owned. I reflected on the conversations that I had accidentally overheard on that unforgettable day as Loretta and I proceeded to delight in the amenities that the spa had to offer. I experienced a tremendous lot of pain as a result of those comments that I happened to overhear. The words that Tiffany wrote were the cause of a great lot of distress for me, but I was completely unaware of the level to which they caused this suffering or of the extent to which they influenced the way in which I perceived our relationship. Over a continuous span of 2 years, I had been treating her like the daughter that I never had in my life. I had granted her permission to take up residence with me and to partake in my life. I had given her the go-ahead to come into my house. I had also given her my heart at that point in time. In spite of this, what decision had she made regarding the method by which she would respond and proceed in the face of this situation? Whenever it was that she needed assistance of any kind, she would treat me as if I were nothing more than a servant who was available to do her bidding. He was unable to perceive what was directly in front of his face because he was overcome by the emotions he had for her. Due to the fact that his love for her was so all-consuming, he was incapable of perceiving anything other than her. He could not understand the ways in which they had taken advantage of him, and he was also unable of recognizing the ways in which they had abused his want to assist them and his affection for them. The fact that Marcus was in desperate need of this instruction grew more and more evident to me as I gave it further consideration. He needed to understand that just because I was a mother did not mean that I had the liberty to take advantage of that fact whenever it suited me. Respecting one another, looking out for one another, and recognizing the needs of others were all components of the experience of being a mother. I have never paused to consider my own needs in my life, despite the fact that I have been giving and giving to others for as long as I can remember. What is it that I was in need of? I insisted that I be treated with dignity by others around me. I was longing for emotional closeness and connection with someone. It was of utmost importance for me to have the belief that I was important. For an extended period of time, that is what I had been coming up short. The next morning, when Loretta and I went to the spa's luxurious dining room to have breakfast, I experienced a strange sense of serenity. I did not feel any particular need to look at my phone on a frequent basis to see whether either Marcus or Tiffany had sent me any new messages. For the most part, I did not receive any messages from either of them throughout the morning. I was aware that, by this point in time, they were definitely in a state of panic, wondering where I was and why I had not shown up for the wedding. I paid no attention to it whatsoever, though. I had come to a decision, and I did not intend to question the validity of my own opinion. I was not going to let them manipulate me into changing my stance by making me feel guilty. I was looking forward to enjoying this period to the fullest because it was my own personal time. We kept taking it easy throughout the day, delighting in the atmosphere of serenity and enjoying the peacefulness that went along with it, just like Loretta and I had been doing. Despite the fact that it came as a surprise, it was a positive experience overall. I have recognized that I had gotten so caught up in the pressures of my life and the demands of my family that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be alive and to just be. For a long time now, I have been working so hard to ensure that everyone else is happy, to meet people's expectations, and to be the perfect mother, grandmother, and wife. On the other hand, what is going to become of those things that I am hoping to occur? What about the things that I was interested in purchasing? How is my own well-being doing? I had not had to worry about any of those things for a long time. Be that as it may, this does not apply to the present day. It is possible that I am just Charlotte. While I was traveling back to the city with Loretta, I experienced a feeling of lucidity. I was aware that I had made the ideal option for myself, and I knew that I would not regret it no matter what happened thereafter. I was not going to let someone take advantage of me again. I was not going to put up with anyone treating me like I was not worth as much as I actually was. I was not going to let my son or his fiancée deceive me into becoming a person I was not. I was resolved to take charge of my own life. In order to do so, I needed to establish boundaries, show myself respect, and demand the same amount of respect from other people. I was aware that the challenges that were ahead of me were not going to be easy to overcome, and I was ready to face them. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to live my life for myself. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming secrets. Thank you.